The Palace of Versailles stands as one of the most magnificent palaces on the planet. Its grandeur, opulence, and sheer size continue to captivate millions of visitors every year. Yet, beneath the glittering surface lies a story far darker than most realize. Though Versailles draws nearly 15 million tourists annually, the history behind its golden walls is filled with shocking and sometimes horrifying truths. During the 17th century, life at Versailles was far from the image of elegance we often associate it with it today. The palace was plagued by poor sanitation, overwhelming human waste, and conditions that would be considered nightmarish by modern standards. This grim reality is a stark contrast to the luxurious facade that continues to attract filmmakers, historians, and tourists alike. Since the early 20th century, over 200 films have been shot at Versailles, showcasing the artistry of directors such as Vincent Minnelli and Sofia Coppola. The palace's interiors, from the Hall of Mirrors to the intricate Baroque architecture, have long fascinated creative minds. Yet, to fully understand Versailles' importance, one must look back at its surprisingly humble beginnings. Versailles was not always the symbol of absolute power it became under Louis XIV. In 1623, during the reign of Louis XIII, the site was a simple wooded wetland near the village of Versailles. The king constructed a modest hunting lodge there, a structure that many contemporaries thought entirely unfit for royalty. François de Bassompierre, a courtier of the time, described it as so uninspiring that it could not even incite vanity in the simplest gentleman. However, the humble lodge would not remain simple for long. By the time of Louis XIII's death in 1643, the hunting lodge had been transformed into a chateau. The heir to the throne, a 4-year-old Louis XIV, later known as the Sun King, would ultimately convert the estate into the legendary Palace of Versailles, a monument to his absolute authority. The spark that motivated Louis XIV's grand vision can be traced to a visit in 1661 to the Chateau de Vaux-le-Vicomte, where he attended an extravagant festival hosted by Nicolas Fouquet, the superintendent of finances. Fouquet's display of wealth was breathtaking, fueled largely by his embezzlement of government funds. Although Fouquet was eventually imprisoned for his corruption, the grandeur of his festival left a lasting impression on the young king. Inspired, Louis XIV recruited the same architects, painters, and gardeners responsible for Fouquet's spectacle, including Louis Laveau, Charles Lebrun, and André Lanouche, to work on his own project at Versailles. What emerged from these efforts was a staggering example of French Baroque architecture. Today, Versailles boasts 2,300 rooms spread across more than 63,000 square meters. Visitors walking through the Hall of Mirrors or the opulent gardens can scarcely imagine the grueling conditions of daily life during the palace's early years. Life at Versailles was dictated by strict rituals and routines designed to glorify the king and reinforce his authority. One of the most notable ceremonies was the king's lever, a morning ritual where members of the royal family and courtiers assisted the king in preparing for the day. Tasks ranged from holding mirrors to displaying clothing, and attendance was often mandatory. A similar ceremony occurred at night to prepare the king for bed. Privacy, as we understand it today, was virtually non-existent, with as many as 100 people present during these proceedings. Courtiers were also subject to rigid dress codes. Men had to wear specific garments depending on the hour or occasion, sometimes including cumbersome hats even during meals. Though visually impressive, these clothes were uncomfortable and nobles longed to remove them whenever possible. Louis XIV's insistence on French textiles meant that any deviation, even by his own family, could provoke a severe response. Once, when the king discovered his son had worn clothing not made by a French designer, he set the outfit on fire. Despite its beauty, Versailles was plagued by appalling hygiene. The prevailing belief in 17th century France held that bathing in warm water weakened the body and opened the pores to disease. As a result, few nobles bathed regularly. Even Louis XIV himself took only 2 full baths in his entire 76-year life. though he maintained some cleanliness through hand washing and the use of towels and perfumes. Sanitation in the palace was another major issue. Chamber pots were common, but with thousands of people living and working at Versailles, they were insufficient to handle the demand. Latrines often overflowed, and human waste frequently contaminated floors and adjacent rooms. Courtiers sometimes disposed of chamber pot contents by simply tossing them out of windows, and even royalty were not immune to such mishaps. Queen Marie Antoinette reportedly experienced accidents caused by thrown waste during her residence at Versailles. The palace grounds were also home to cats and other animals whose presence worsened the sanitation problems. Rodents were common, and while cats attempted to control them, they contributed their share of mess. Moreover, lice infestations were widespread. Men often shaved their heads and wore wigs to combat lice, while women who kept full hair struggled more with infestations. The popularity of elaborate wigs, particularly under Louis XIV, created ideal breeding grounds for lice, necessitating tedious maintenance. Food hygiene posed additional challenges. Courtiers frequently suffered from intestinal parasites due to unsanitary preparation methods, and even the king was not spared. Louis XIV reportedly passed tapeworms, underscoring the severity of these conditions. The palace's design exacerbated the problem. Unlike estates built near flowing rivers, Versailles lacked natural waste management, leaving garbage and sewage to accumulate over time. Life at Versailles was also morally complex. As the court became a permanent fixture, the surrounding forest became venues for secret rendezvous and illicit affairs. Those seeking intimacy often engaged in clandestine acts for money, a situation that drew the king's scrutiny. Louis XIV maintained strict control over the court, using elaborate dances, ballets, and performances to keep courtiers occupied and under supervision, reducing the likelihood of conspiracy or rebellion. Even childbirth at Versailles lacked privacy. When Queen Marie Antoinette gave birth to her daughter, Marie Thérèse, in 1778, a large crowd of courtiers gathered outside and inside her chamber, leaving the queen overwhelmed and even fainting at one point. The palace's history also influenced culture in unusual ways. Certain colors, such as the reddish-brown known as puce, were inspired by the unsavory realities of Versailles. Marie Antoinette's choice of dress colors sometimes drew critical attention, reflecting both the extravagance and the scandal of the royal court. By the reign of Louis XVI, public resentment towards Versailles had grown. The disparity between the luxurious life of the monarchy and the hardships of the French populace contributed to revolutionary fervor. During the Revolution, Versailles became a prime target, and its iconic Golden Gate was destroyed by order of the revolutionary government. It wasn't until 2008 that a restoration project returned the gate to its former glory using 100,000 gold leaves. Despite its dark past, Versailles remains a symbol of artistic achievement, architectural mastery, and cultural heritage. The palace's elaborate gardens, gilded halls, and countless artworks reflect centuries of dedication by skilled craftsmen and artists. However, understanding the human cost, the hygiene issues, rigid social hierarchies, and moral complexities provides a more complete and sobering picture of life at one of history's most famous palaces. From a simple hunting lodge to a sprawling emblem of absolute monarchy, the Palace of Versailles is a testament to both human ingenuity and the extreme lengths to which power and prestige can shape daily life. Its story, filled with grandeur and grime alike, reminds us that history is never as shiny as it appears from the outside.